Shalanda. This is Dr. Shalanda Driver with us today for NLU Real Talk.
Hello, thanks for having me, Dr. Nelson.
Thank you for being with us. So Dr. Driver, tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional journey.
So I am Dr. Shalanda Driver. I actually started out in my district in education as a school secretary. I had this great plan that I was going to start out this way, work on my degree, and then I was going to become a teacher. I was like, this should be a seamless process. However, when I finished my degree, my district was doing a huge layoff of teachers. So unfortunately, I was not able to get a teaching position right away. My first teaching position was actually at a non-instrumentality charter school for my district. I happened to go to a job fair and one of the HR people were like, hey, why aren't you in the district? And I said, well, because you laid all the teachers off. So she got me interviewed, and like within a week, I was at one of our traditional middle schools. From there, I taught middle school math. I taught all grade levels. And then I moved on to be a school support teacher, which is the equivalent of like an instructional coach. So just providing coaching and instructional support to teachers within the building. About 2 years later, our school became a recipient of a school improvement grant. And as the SST, which is what we call the school support teacher, the SST, I did a lot of the work with helping to write the grant for our school. So because of my work there, I was promoted to school improvement specialist, which was a district administrative position to help oversee the grant and the school improvement process within my building. After that, I moved up to the district level and was working out at our central office, supporting all of the school improvement grant schools. And then I moved into a position, it's like this never ending snowball, moved into a position as a student performance specialist, school performance coordinator, which worked with an entire region of schools to oversee their school improvement process, help them with systems for setting up academic systems and meeting systems. So with their leadership teams, their academic intervention teams, I would meet with those teams monthly to just make sure that they were on track with meeting the goals of their SIP. Currently, I am supporting a school within the region that I supported as an assistant principal. So still kind of doing a dual role, but more of my feet are dipped into the AP position right now. So that's me.
Yeah, that was a lot. And I was going to say, starting off as a school secretary, I'm sure you learned a lot because the school secretaries have the behind the scenes knowledge of everything.
Yes, I feel like it equipped me really well to just have that. I feel like I have a complete view of school and the school system, because being a secretary, I got to work with parents. I got to work, closely with administration. And then my work as a teacher, having that ability to work closely with teaching colleagues. And I just felt like it gave me a well-rounded view of just how to interact with a number of different people, with our community partners, our parents, our students. It really prepared me. So I'm glad that my career path took me that way.
Yeah, I think that's a really seamless way to get into administration, because you do have so many opportunities. I always teased my building secretary, my principal secretary, that she should just be the principal, because times where she's doing the things that I was supposed to do because I wasn't around. So
yeah.
So I totally appreciate that. And so your district position is pretty loaded, and I know that it has a significant amount of responsibilities in terms of grant writing.
Yes.
And monitoring grants and complying with the requirements that the federal government puts out, in the state as well.
Yes.
Tell me how you navigate some of that. And I know that also is directly related to your research, but tell me how you navigate some of those challenges with just grant administration and implementation in general.
Yeah, it's a difficult pathway for sure. The school I was at, when we first got the school improvement grant, people struggled because it went beyond just the school improvement plan. it's like, okay, now we're receiving federal dollars to help implement this school improvement plan. So whatever we put inside of this plan, we have to actually do it. So there was a huge level of responsibility for the school and accountability for the school that they hadn't really been used to. I think having me in the building or having that position available in the building to kind of stay on the top of it, because building principals get bogged down with so much stuff. And we couldn't have our school support teacher do it because you needed somebody that was going to be able to hold people accountable. Because there were literally conversations I had to have with people and say, you know, I'm really sorry you all want to do this, but this is what you all said that you were going to do. So we have to follow. Now we can pivot at some point, but, you know, initially we have to start, you know, at least attempting to do what we wrote inside of our plan to do and inside of the grant to do. So it was really hard trying to navigate the requirements of the grant and then also meet the requirements of the district, because unfortunately, we were not in a place yet as a district where we had gave schools that level of autonomy. There was supposed to be operational flexibility. That's what was written inside of the grant. However, that did not always happen. So there were a lot of very courageous conversations and meetings with our central administration to say, you know, I understand, you know, that this is the direction that the district is going, but it does not correlate with the direction that the school wants to go in. And because they have this grant and they have these requirements, they can't do this right now, or you can't put this program into their building right now because they can only have this going on. So it was very it was very difficult to kind of navigate that and, you know, go against, you know, and in some cases, like, you know, your regional superintendent and say, hey, I apologize, I'm really sorry, but they cannot do this. Or even it was a lot of advocating as well to say they already have this number of programs in their building. Like, quite honestly, they just cannot manage another one. Or as a SIG school, they're supposed to have all licensed teachers in their building. Like, these are, you know, the students that are in the most need, and we need people in place that can give them what they need to have. So a lot of advocating for them, a lot of having to be bold and brave enough to say, no, they can't, but then also having that level of compromise as well, because the ultimate goal of the SIG is for our schools to come out of that status. So at some point, it's, you know, just having those discussions about what can we do to make sure they're meeting the grant requirements, but on track to get to where the district is heading as well. Because when they come out of the grant, we don't want them to be too far behind the curve. So even there was a lot of alignment as well, saying, you know, how, looking at what the school is already doing, what the district wants to do, and then how can we align those two so that there's somewhat of a balance, because ultimately we don't want schools to go farther behind district expectations and requirements. So it was a dance.
I imagine. And it sounds like you were really instrumental in scaffolding some of those steps or some of those ways to connect between the individual schools and the district.
Right. Even with the grant, you know, we had to do a lot of kind of infographics to show, say, hey, because at the time we had the SIG grant, and then we also had another initiative, Turnaround Arts, in our building that came from President Obama's administration. So we had to like literally put together this flow chart that showed, here's Turnaround Arts, here's SIG, here's the district, and here's where they all kind of meet in the middle. Here's where they align. We can take this piece, we take this piece from SIG, this meets this requirement for Turnaround Arts, and this requirement for the district will meet this requirement for SIG. So a lot of just massaging, a lot of massaging to make sure everybody was happy, and then that all the requirements were met as much as possible, because we also didn't want the school to feel bogged down. Like, that's a lot on a school when you're already struggling with other pieces that are outside of their control. Now, hey, I have 3 major initiatives that I have to make sure I'm in compliance with. And how do we, you know, align that so that the school doesn't feel that pressure?
Yeah. So I know that your dissertation, your research was exactly about that, SIG standing for School Improvement Grants.
Yes.
And so tell me about some of the results and the findings that came out of your research. And then we'll go on to talk a little bit about what were some things that you uncovered that perhaps revealed some inequities in the way that things are managed.
Okay, so one of the biggest thing that I wanted to know in my research was I wanted to research what were some of those components and things that schools that had previously had SIGs or school improvement grants, what were some things that they did? What were those prevalent characteristics inside of those schools? And I wanted to know if they were present inside of our SIG schools. I also wanted to know how we as a district might be getting in the way of schools implementing their grants. And that just kind of came from things that I was seeing during my work. I was like, I really want to, because I know how I feel about it, but I was like, I really want to explore this further to see if, this was a consistent theme going throughout our SIG cohort. And I found just that the major themes were there were high expectations in schools that had SIGs and found success. They worked to build strong relationships and trust. And then they also, why did I forget my research that quick? There was coherence and collaboration. So very strong collaboration opportunities. One of the things that I found out for our schools, the biggest kind of hindrance was the collaboration piece. Because we have a very strong teachers union here, a lot of the opportunities for building leaders to meet with teachers and provide that collaborative time have been stripped away. There were only a certain amount they could only meet with teachers 1 hour per week. If it was a 4-day week, they could not meet with them at all. So if we had no school on a Friday or a Monday, that week is just gone for meetings. If there's like an open house or parent teacher conference, we can't meet with teachers that week. So and then when I looked at our district calendar, I realized there are so many 4-day weeks in our calendar that it was almost essentially impossible for building leaders to meet with staff. Trying to strike that balance between, do I meet to give them PD or do I meet to discuss the needs that are, have a staff meeting and talk about what's happening in our building. The other thing was, outside of that, there was not a lot of time, or because of the culture in some of our schools, specifically our SIG schools, they have high populations of students with disabilities. They are all located in high poverty areas, high crime areas. So because of the culture and because of what some of our, students by no fault of their own brought into, the building, teachers were just burned out at the end of the day. And so there wasn't an opportunity to meet after school either, even though there were funds available. At the end of the day, people just wanted to go home. So lots of opportunities to meet and collaborate just gone. The master calendar within the schools did not really allow for those grade level meetings to take place during the day either. And if they did, like just recently, I was looking at some of our board minutes, and specials time is considered admin directed time. So essentially now principals could meet with teachers during that time. But because, people have to sub or cover classes, a lot of times, they're just given that break. Like, we're not going to meet with you. We're going to give you time to prep and do what you need to do. But I did read in our upcoming board minutes that they are trying to make that specials time now teacher directed time. So it's going to be coming down eventually that they won't even have that time moving forward to meet with them. So another opportunity gone. Again, it all kind of ties back to the power of our teachers union here. It's a very, very strong union. Building relationships, the research did find that the majority of building leaders and teachers felt like they had strong relationships. that they felt comfortable going to talk to their administrators about their concerns or issues. They felt supported. So relationship building was not an issue. I don't know why I keep drawing a blank. I'm so sorry. High expectations were also very prevalent. Everybody was aware of the grant. They were aware of the grant requirements. They had opportunities to collect data, and when they did have meetings, they did discuss those data. They used protocols to discuss them and talk about, here's what our data says. Why do we think our data is this way? And then what can we do about it? What are some next steps that we can take? So protocols were in place to address what they were seeing happening in their buildings, both with culture and academics. So high expectations wasn't a problem either. It seemed that the problem stemmed from, again, issues or policies that were outside of the school's control. So those policies that were, pushed down from our central leadership and from our central office. So when I thought about how do we get in our own way, a lot of our district practices and policies really impeded schools from implementing their grants. There were a lot of responses from some of the building leaders as far as just the hierarchy of getting things approved, how that was a huge barrier because they had to go through so many channels to spend the funding that essentially had already been approved for that thing. But because the process was they would write their grant, they would send it to our Department of Public Instruction. I know in Illinois, you have a Board of Education. So here we have the Department of Public Instruction. So they would send it over to the Department of Public Instruction. They would approve the plan. And the way we wrote the plan, we itemized it. So they knew exactly where the money was being spent. So it was already approved by the Department of Public Instruction. However, it had to go through this hierarchy of approval here in the district. So it had to go to our procurement department, and then it had to go to a regional superintendent, and then it had to go to the superintendent. And so there were times where things would just get buried. Quite honestly, principals would say, I talked to my regional and my plan was buried on their desk. Or because a regional supports so many schools, they might not have had a chance to even read the full plan. So they didn't understand that these were continuity of services. So things weren't approved. So just so many barriers to implementation. The time requirement to meet, that's another, component that was outside of schools' sphere of influence. So a lot of district policies and procedures really prevented schools from doing what they needed to do, which was probably my biggest finding.
Yeah, what you said, the word autonomy, when you first started sharing this information. And sometimes when there are barriers, principals and administrators get really creative, right?
Yes.
It doesn't sound like they had the opportunity to even do that with the layers of bureaucracy that they navigate, or that they had to wait for.
Right, exactly. And there were times where our team of coordinators did get very creative in order to get it approved by our Department of Public Instruction. So if our teachers needed supplies, or if we wanted to purchase Chromebooks, for the staff, or, computers for the staff, we tied it to the fact that right now we're virtual. So teachers need to have, updated working functional computers with cameras so that we can hold these PD opportunities. So we were able to get these things approved by DPI, but then once we got it back to the school level, it was like, nope, here's another barrier, you can't get it for this reason. So I think it was also just because we work very closely with the Department of Public Instruction. We had meetings with them 3 times a year, at the beginning of the year, midpoint, and then at the end of the year, for schools to present their progress. So we worked very closely with that team, whereas our school improvement team at central office did not. So we just had, a different relationship with them. We had a different knowledge base as far as how to write the grant so that we can ensure we can get things done that we needed to get done. We knew how to connect the dots. And unfortunately, when people don't have that vantage point, they're just strictly, it's black and white. Well, this says you have to do it for this, so you can't, that's not professional development. So you can't spend the funds on that. But it's supporting professional development. So we could spend the funds on it, but When
Mhm.
people don't have that knowledge base, it delays the process.
Yeah, so part of that question was also about equity issues, and
Mhm.
you mentioned that these school improvement grant schools are in high need areas, high need schools. And so did you uncover any other things? I mean, I think the global perspective is that because they're high need schools, there are these barriers. We are not able to provide these supports and services.
Exactly.
There is a huge equity issue.
Right. And
So,
that was one of the biggest things. The majority of our CX schools were not fully staffed. We had schools that still had vacancies at the start of the year. We had schools that had permit teachers. And one of the system inequities that was uncovered was how our schools are staffed. My old supervisor during that time would always say, we can't take a candy striper to a brain surgery. If somebody needs brain surgery, you don't take the candy striper, like you need to get the surgeon there. So one of the things that was not happening in our district was we were not taking our best talent and placing them in those schools that had the highest needs. We also didn't have a system to ensure that teachers stayed within those buildings. The grant did allow for us to give incentives and stipends to teachers to stay in those buildings, but it was something that again was blocked by our teachers union because they felt it was, oddly enough, they felt it was an inequitable practice to give some teachers stipends and incentives. But nothing was done to ensure that our babies that needed the most help had what they needed. So,
interesting.
yes.
What's
So
good for the adults as opposed to what's good for the kids.
exactly. We also in those buildings, the very first, so we had a planning year and then the first year of implementation. The first year of implementation, 3 of the schools, they placed brand new building leaders in. And when I say brand new, novice leaders that hadn't had any administrative experience. They may have been assistant principals, but none of them had experience running a school at that, at the principal level, which was a direct violation of the grant because the grant stated that you needed to have experienced leaders running these buildings. So we started out the first year, and maybe midway through the year, there was finally a change in leadership to make sure that we were meeting that requirement. So just things like that, those types of inequities around staffing were definitely uncovered. The fact that shouldn't have even been that way anyway. Like people knew the grant requirement, but yet and still we had novice leaders in these buildings. People knew the grant requirements, but we didn't have, we weren't fully staffed. We weren't able to provide stipends. That was a quick and easy way, I feel, to get people to stay. We also had inequities with the way students were placed in buildings. Here they kind of call it the dance of the lemons. As students were, as students might have had an administrative transfer based on behavior, they were just kind of recycled in the schools. And there was and those were typically, our North Side schools where our schools are already not performing at the rate in which they should be performing. But these students were never placed in our South Side schools that had, high achievement. They just circled around and were recycled and bounced back and forth. So if you lost somebody, you were going to gain somebody.
It's like peeling that onion, and when you have yucky onions,
yes,
peel away one layer and it's yucky, and then you peel away another layer and you get to the middle and it's still yucky.
Yes.
Oh God.
Yep. So even inequities in, how students were placed in buildings, students, came mid-year, just, if they might have left a charter school, teachers, I don't want to use this word, so I'll use the word that I heard teachers and administrators use. They felt like students were just dumped, like they were dumping grounds. Like it's the middle of the year and we have a kid that got put out of a charter school, we're sticking them over in this school. Like we don't need we're already understaffed. We don't have the resources to provide, the needs, but we just keep piling on and piling on and piling on.
So as an administrator with a significant amount of responsibility that you have, how do you address some of those really challenging systemic inequities? Because like I said, there are layers and layers here, right?
Right. And it's all so political. So one of the things that I really try to work with schools on doing is thinking about what they can control, right? Because there's some things that unless there's a huge policy change, we just can't change. So one of the things that the schools have to do is fill out a resource and equity tool that has them look at all of those things. So you look at your teachers, how many permanent teachers do you have? How many veteran teachers do you have? You look at the students within your building. How many students do you have with disabilities? You look at the demographic makeup of your teachers versus your students. It also looks at parent involvement. So how many families do you have? And then how many of those families are actually engaged in the decision-making process? We look at the curriculum that we use. So we look at like edreports.org and we see, are these, is the curriculum that we're using in our building, is it aligned to the standards? Does it meet the requirements for being aligned to the standards for being culturally relevant? So having them really take a look and spend a good amount of time there to set up their systems for planning for the next year. So if you have teachers if you have a lot of permanent teachers in your school, then one of the things I'd encourage schools to do is really look at your onboarding plan. Make sure you have a very strong onboarding plan so that you are meeting with those new teachers regularly. So that, again, because we still have people go in and out, if you do have teachers that leave and you have new staff come in, do they understand the way of your school? So do they understand the NLU way? This is how we do business here. I worked with schools to set up full Google sites that had just everything somebody coming in would need. Here's all of our protocols, here's all of our schedules, here's your information about evaluations, here's information about, just school-wide systems, what you do if you need to, if a kid needs to go to the bathroom, because we followed the 8 essentials of school climate and culture from Mr. Bambrick. So we looked at our systems around dismissal and arrival, our celebration systems, our lunchroom systems, like hallway systems. So we looked at, all of our school-wide systems, making sure those things are strong. And when it comes to the curriculum, if we don't have a curriculum that is aligned to the standards, what professional development do we need to offer our teachers to ensure that they can make those connections? What resources can we buy to provide them with to make sure that they're able to supplement the curriculum to ensure students are being taught the standards? How do we get our families engaged and on the same page? So what opportunities do we have to meet? How often are we surveying our parents? And even when we're surveying parents, what are we doing with those results? Are those results being shared? Are we using those results to make decisions? And then having that open two-way communication with our parents. So encouraging them to have listening sessions where, we're not saying anything. We're just going to listen to our parents talk. If there are major decisions that need to be made in our building, have we gotten our parents' input? What do our parents think about it? What do our parents think we could do to better our school? What do our parents think that we need? Because we want to have our parents as partners. We want to reach out to our, community members that are, within close range of us. How can we, utilize and leverage those? If you have partnerships in your buildings already, a lot of our schools here had City Year and we had violence-free zones. So how do we work together with them to create systems, not only where we can help our students build relationships outside of just the teachers, because I'm a strong relationship. I believe strongly in relationships.
I was just thinking that.
I do, even in this role now, we have a CLC here in the building. And if I'm having an issue with a student, I'll go to our CLC director and say, hey, can you support me with this? Because I know the students in CLC,
CLC
is a community learning center. Community learning center. So it's an after school program, like a Boys and Girls Club. So I'll go to, our Boys and Girls Club director and say, hey, I know this student stays with you after school. Can you have a conversation with them about this? I know you all have a great relationship, and leveraging those relationships and understanding that unless it takes a village, and unless we partner together and use all pieces of the village that we can, we won't see what we want to see. So just really getting schools to think about those kinds of things. How can, when you have those funds, how can you spend your funds to really impact what you can impact? We couldn't do the incentives, but hey, we're gonna have a lunch and learn. So we'll buy lunch. You can come in, and if you come in during lunch, or even if you bring your lunch in, like, we can pay you during your lunchtime, so you don't have to stay after school. So just being very creative and finding ways to make sure they can address, those inequities within their building, even though they can't address the system wide right now, and hoping that people starting to see these things will spark with somebody else. Oh, that school over there was doing this. Yep, they're a SIG school, and they did this because they couldn't do it that way. So trying to, just, light those little fires where hopefully we'll have an explosion.
So as you were talking, Shalanda, I was thinking, going back to that analogy of being up on the balcony, and it seems like you are such a strong coach and advisor in that area of helping those administrators see the big picture with all of those systems that you identified, which are huge, right? Those are the big buckets that we are always involved in. But I think what you said about the relationship piece is also such a strength of your leadership, is that you do create these wonderful connections.
Thank you.
And bring these folks to, a better place.
Yeah, I think one of the other big things is just getting them to celebrate everything, celebrate the little things, because I would sit in meetings and they would say, oh, we didn't get a chance to do this. I said, but you got a chance to do that. So we're going to celebrate that. And just, I would just trying to be their biggest cheerleaders. Like, they have enough on them as it is. So I would always just come from a place of support. Let them know, like, my job is to support you. I'm working for you. I'm here for you. So we're going to work together to make sure you all can do what it is you need to do. And we're going to celebrate everything along the way. If you didn't have a staff meeting this month because of whatever reason, but you got one in next month, we're celebrating because you had a staff meeting. If you had 2 teachers that turned in their formative assessment data, we're celebrating that because it could have been 0. So just, teaching them to give themselves credit for the things that they are doing, and then helping them see that they are doing things, because they're just not always making it into their plans, or it's not always being documented. So helping them just be more intentional about that. They were like, well, we did, we had a parent fair. I said, that's great. You should put that in your plan. Like, that's parent involvement. So but I think that's just, it's part of education, right? We just go and go and go, and we do things for our parents and our students, and we don't think about it because it's ingrained in us. It is who we are. So we don't think like, oh, that would be a great thing for me to put in my school improvement plan that I did for my parents. So just bringing it back sometimes, like you said, being on the balcony and being that, critical friend.
Yeah, I think, what you said is just so astute in terms of principals and building leaders, school leaders, being so involved in the day-to-day, and especially the last couple of years, it's just, you're entrenched, right?
Exactly.
So it's nice to provide that space to have them take a step back for a second and really reflect on all of those things.
Right.
And provide lunch and chocolate and hugs and love in the meantime, and to have them really recognize that there is a lot of work that has been done.
Right. So we just got to document that work and say, we're getting there, and just letting them see you're getting there. It's not, school improvement is not an overnight process. Things didn't become the way they are overnight, and we're not going to fix them overnight. Just, having that endurance is
right. And it's telling their story. They're telling their story in their schools, and sometimes stories don't have, they don't have the greatest storyline. Some things work out.
Exactly. Which is exactly why I structured my research the way I did. I really wanted to get perception data, because I feel like so much of school improvement is that quantitative data, and it doesn't always measure, those wins. I'm like, because we may not have met the state benchmark, but you know what? We had 25 students that were performing below level last year or at the beginning of the year, and those students are on level this year. But because there's that huge target, those 25 may not send our numbers the way we want it to go, but that's still a win for us. Our climate might have been completely off the chain where kids were throwing chairs every day, but guess what? Now they're not. I said our students know they can take a break, or we've taught them de-escalation techniques, or like I wanted that part of school improvement to be captured, the part that we don't always hear, the part that can't be measured. It's a story that has to be told.
Absolutely. And I think that is a wonderful way to finalize our meeting here today, Shalanda. You have a great story to tell, and I look forward to hearing more of your story, because it is a beautiful story.
Thank you.
And it has always been an honor and a pleasure to work with you, and we are gonna be in Milwaukee soon.
Yes. Yes, likewise. It has been great. My experience at NLU has been so great. I definitely appreciate it. And this doctoral journey has just been, I get so passionate about school improvement, and it's nice to just have an outlet to talk about it and talk about the research and what I found. And I just really hope that as time goes on, we can really create some systems and where we don't even have to have the school improvement conversation anymore.
And as you were talking to, one of the things that was going through my mind as I was listening to you intently is that what an amazing adjunct you would be.
Oh, thank you. Something I will definitely think about.
Once you come up for air and after you go to the beach.
Yes, yes. I definitely will consider that for sure.
Okay, good. All right, Shalanda, as always, a pleasure to see you and to talk with you. And we will talk soon. I'm just